Hey, how's it going? In today's video, we're going to be doing a walkthrough of my main big pedal board that I recently put back together in the spirit of streamlining things. I found myself with the board in shambles, plugging in pretty much the same pedals every time as far as the drive, compression, and how I was routing the effects. And it became a barrier to creating and really doing my job as far as recording songs, doing remote session work here at my home studio. So I put it back together, used pretty much the same cables and routing and everything from before I took it apart. So it's not a full, complete build. Didn't start from scratch. I basically put it back together, changed a few pedals out to the ones that I was using most of the time. Now my fly rig is my go-to gigging pedal board if I'm sitting in or hired out for a one-off gig. So there's a few pedals that have to stay on that board. For example, my Love Pedal Kanji. It's my favorite overdrive pedal and I need it on my live board. Other than that, everything that I use recording-wise most of the time is on this big board. So we're gonna walk through the signal chain. I'll demo most of the pedals on here, and I'm gonna talk through just my thought process on why I decided to go with the pedals that I did and put this board back together. So let's talk about my signal chain before we get into the board. I'm playing my James Tyler straight into the pedal board into the Apollo interface, and what I'm running is the Pete Thorne Sir PT100 amp plugin. It's by Brainworks. This I find is the most versatile UAD amp, I think, out of the entire collection, at least out of the collection of amps that I have in the UAD universe. The cleans are a lot more real, and the drive sounds are really versatile. And so there's some other amps that do some specialty things that are really cool, but this is a great, if you only got one amp plug-in, I would recommend the PT100. It's the one I find myself using more times than not. So I've got a really sterile, basic, clean sound as a platform here. So it's a great, really clean sound. I've got the Big Sky, my Timeline, the Harlow, and the OB1 on. This is my standard clean sound. I basically don't have anything cleaner or drier than this going on almost ever, you know, depending on what the track needs, if there's some super dry guitar parts to fill in. But this is kind of my go-to first step clean. So, and I'll throw settings on the screen for the PT100, what I'm using. I think it's a 112 cab, channel 1, and yeah, just going straight into Logic. So let's talk about the signal chain and then we'll kind of listen to some sounds. So let's talk about the signal chain here. The Goodwood interfacer handles all the I/O on this board, and my guitar goes straight into the passive input, so it's before any buffer. And out of that passive input, the first thing it sees is the exotic wah. It's a really versatile wah, especially with the, you know, the different settings that you have on the side of it. I've got it set pretty throaty right now. We can just put a little bit of drive on. It's a great wah sound, and it's there, you know, when you need it. The Argonaut is next, and it's like a clean octave. You can almost chord with it, but the cool thing is you can add it to any other drive to create your fuzz octave Octavia sound. So you can have a lot cleaner drive or a big fuzz. Which is a great effect to have, you know, kind of separated from the fuzz there rather than a normal Octavia. Then the Pelotar fuzz, which we've gone over. Really like it because it's more of a drive fuzz than completely taking over your signal. You can still chord with it, which is really good for what I do, doing so much, you know, remote session work. You know, I want to be able to tailor it to where it's really usable and versatile. So then out of the Pelotar, we go into the buffered input of the Goodwood interfacer. So we see our input buffer now. And out of that input buffer, we see the pre side of the Mobius. I've got my Mobius set up in pre-post so that depending on what patch and what effect I'm using, it's before or after the drive section. So we go in to the pre and out of the pre side of the Mobius into the Strymon OB1. This stays on nearly 100% of the time. Real subtle. The compressor part is what I have on all the time. There's an updated version of this pedal called the Compadre. It's got some more settings, a little more versatile, but this one works great for me. It's real subtle. Here's with it off. Again, subtle compression on the front end. I also have the Harlow on, which is way down the chain, which is also compressing the signal, but these are effectively always on, and so there's just an integral part of the signal chain in my sound. It's also got a boost that you can make a mid boost, a treble boost, or a flat boost. I typically leave it on the flat boost, and it's before the drive so I can hit them harder, send them into a little more gain. Now, out of the OB1, we get into our first drive pedal, which is the steel string. Real subtle. It's just kind of like a colorful, clean tone. It's a variation on a clean tone, got a little hair, a little breakup, and it's a little more stiff sounding. Typically use that for chording big parts to kind of emphasize like a chorus. So then we go into the Riverside, again another pedal that we've covered, really versatile, probably my most used overdrive pedal. So we've covered that pedal, not much more to go over there. Then we hit the Blues Power, which is my SRV tone Strat into a super reverb with a tube screamer. It does the blues strat thing perfectly. Then we get into the Echo Park Echo Driver. And this can kind of do two things really well in my mind. It does a great Zen drive and it does a great clon. I have it somewhere in the Zen drive territory right now. Kind of that singing lead sound. And if we go to the OB1 and just use that boost, can get really long sustained notes there. And then we hit the TC Electronic Booster Line Driver and Distortion pedal. It's a variation on a higher gain sound for me. A little brighter, a little crispier, sizzly on the top end. Got more of that kind of 80s sound, and so I use it as my less smooth, higher gain sound. Then out of the TC Electronic, TC Electronic Booster Line Driver and Distortion, we go into the Bogner Harlow, again, on 100% of the time. So we can listen to it without real quick. It beefs up this guitar, and I'll change that tone knob if I want a little bit of a thinner sound or of a bit of a bigger sound. So I have it set to a little bit of a bigger sound right now. I've got a little more top end, and if we push it even more, we've got a tighter sound, a little bit thinner of a sound, which can be really useful in the mix. I typically leave it to add width, because I want a little bit thicker of a sound. That's kind of the baseline that I start from, and then I'll thin it up as needed from there. We've got just a little bit of compression and a little bit of boost coming from the Harlow, but not much. It's kind of the master preamp of my pedal board. So it's compression and EQ after the drives. Speaking of EQ, then we go to the good old GE7. This is not even a cool modded one by XTS. This is a straight out of the box one, and it's a utility. I don't use it all the time, but when I need it, it's there, and really nothing can compromise having an EQ pedal on your board, especially when you're doing a lot of recording. Being able to quickly take out some low end, retain the top, push the mids, scoop them. I find myself doing only a couple things with it, which is cutting lows, boosting mids, cutting mids. And the top end, I typically don't try to boost. If anything, I'll cut a little bit to get a much softer sound, much softer attack on the top end. But boosting top end a lot of times just leads to noise. And so it's a utility pedal, but you know, it's hard to get rid of for those times that you need it. I mean, it's maybe 10% of the time that I use it as far as recording goes. Live, rarely do I ever use it. But for that 10%, it's undeniably useful. So it stays. And out of that, we go into the post side of the Mobius. And the reason for that is different effects. So we've got the vibe here. I like in front of the effects. So like the vibe would be there. If we go to a chorus, that's going to be post drive. So it's more luscious after the drives. Also like the Leslie setting a lot. So, you know, just depending on what effect I have queued up, it's going to sit in a different place before or after the drives, which is a really, really useful feature. And while we're talking about the Mobius, I have this mastermind here, and in what feels like a previous life before the pandemic, I would play for a handful of regional artists and basically have, you know, set lists saved for different effects on the Strymons, so reverb, delay, and modulation. Now it's pretty much on the board to mostly control the Mobius, to jump between different banks. The delays, I typically am now, you know, tailoring for the song and using a lot of delays in post, you know, affecting the whole signal in a way that, you know, hitting the front end of an amp or a virtual amp isn't going to quite get me. So a lot of the delays that I'm using are subtle delays going into the front end of the amp. The reverbs, I'm pretty much using the hall or a plate reverb and just tailoring the mix more than anything. You know, just to get to the place that I want, trying to create as quickly as possible and spend less time finicking with the pedals. And so the Mastermind is pretty much set up to control the Mobius. It can still do, recall some of those old set lists from little tours and stuff. But right now, it's pretty much just a way to jump between presets on the Mobius that are pretty far apart, and I would just have to sit there and click through the banks to get. This kind of avoids that for me. So that's what the Mastermind is pretty much doing. So out of the post mode of the Mobius, we go into the timeline, and again, like I said, I'm using subtle. Turn the reverb off. You can hear it's just real subtle, like one repeat And this is pretty much stays on for most parts. Especially lead stuff, but even chording. Adds a little bit of depth, just enough to kind of widen the guitar sound a little bit. And then out of the timeline, we are going stereo out and stereo in to the big sky and stereo out of the big sky into both left and right of the interfacer. And what I'll do a lot of times is, especially running virtual amps, is I'll set up 2 amps, 2 of the same virtual amp, and just change something like the cab or the IR on one of them, just to add, again, a little bit of width and depth. And this has stereo summing to mono. Which is not great, but it's also really practical and useful. It's not going to be a perfect sum of every stereo pedal, but for what I'm doing as far as getting really consistently good sounds at a quick, manageable pace, so that I can kind of do my job and create and have as few boundaries as possible from an idea or a project starting to getting the right sounds to tracking the right part. It's a really useful feature. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's video walking through my main pedal board. After putting it back together in the spirit of streamlining things, eliminating barriers as much as I can, I found myself much more productive. And I would encourage you to do the same thing. It's easy to find yourself surrounded with gear because you love gear and have option paralysis. And that is a killer of productivity and creativity. And ultimately, that's what we're here to do, is create. So I encourage you to use the gear that you have, make it worthwhile, and eliminate as many barriers as you can to creating. Whether that's writing a song, practicing guitar, or just getting good tones. If you can streamline the process of thinking about it and doing it, you'll find yourself much happier for it. Let me know down in the comments below what barriers are in place of you creating or practicing or playing the guitar. What things could you streamline and kind of make the gear that you have earn its place. If this is the kind of content that you enjoy, please like and subscribe to this new channel. Share it with others who would enjoy this kind of content. And until next time, I've been Colin. And it became something that, all right. Let me know down in the comments below what process mean is that you can know your gear. What it does mean is that you can know that the gear, what it does mean is you can know the gear you have much better than if pedals on here and just kind of, so I encourage, okay, let's do this all again. Decisions that I was, all right.